This is the Janet Ray podcast with another episode of What's It Really Like? We are taking you inside the lives to hear the stories, to hear the moments from people themselves and just different situations. And on today's episode of What's It Really Like? We are talking about the Oklahoma City bombing and what's it really like to lose a child in the Oklahoma City bombing. Aren Almon is with me, and she is the mother of Baylee. And you'll remember on April 19th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh detonated a homemade bomb housed in a Ryder truck in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people. One of those people was Aren Almon's one-year-old daughter, Baylee. And right after the photo, the day after the bombing, a photo came out, and that was Baylee in the photo. She was being carried away from the rubble in the arms of firefighter Chris Fields, which has really probably become the, I would say, most famous photo from the bombing. You see that photo, and you immediately know that's in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, you do.
It is. It's that photo. I mean, and it's, makes it probably even harder for you for that to be your child. But Aren, let's talk a little bit about your story and where does your story start? Like, tell us a little bit about your life, about Baylee before April 19th.
Baylee had her birthday was the day before, so April 18th, 1994, she was born. So April 18th, the day before the bombing, was her first birthday. It was just a day like any other day. She had a birthday party. My sisters and I have 3 sisters, so there's 4 of us. So between us, we have like 13 kids. There's a lot. So it was a birthday party. I mean, she had all her cousins were there. Everyone was there, and we celebrated her birthday. And I remember that night when I laid her in bed, I remember seeing all the toys that were still like in the boxes and stuff, and I was like, she's got plenty of time. She didn't play with them, but she's got plenty of time to do that. So yeah, it was just like any other day.
And so you had Baylee. You were 22 years old.
I was 22 years old when Baylee was killed. Yeah,
22 years old, and I think about that because I've lived in Oklahoma my entire life. I was living here, and I think about that. In my mind, I think I thought you were older, because now I compare my 22-year-old. My 22-year-old is in the other room playing games online, while I just did his laundry. And I think you really have to put that into perspective.
Definitely.
When you're hearing your story.
I don't think about it as much because I was a young mother. But, I mean, my daughter's 22. And I was there yesterday doing her laundry at OU. Yes. I mean, so it is different. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is. Back then, you did have kids younger sometimes, and I mean, I was a single parent, so I mean, I never intended on Baylee being an only child. So it was just kind of one of those things where, I mean, I knew I would have more later, so
that was your starting point.
That was your starting point. It was, and I mean, I was fine with that. I mean, you just kind of play the card you dealt. Yeah. So I took on the single motherhood, and I was fine with it. Yeah. I mean, I liked it.
And you lived in Regency Tower, which is pretty much adjacent to the building.
Less than a block away.
Yeah. Yeah. And you actually still live there now.
I live there now again. Yeah. Yes.
So and that was April 18th. April 18th. 1995.
Right.
So on the morning of April 19th, before 9:02, what was your morning like?
I got Baylee up, got her ready for daycare because I had to go to work, and I took her to daycare. And they say you kind of know things before they happen. I noticed things that were different. Like the daycare, I remember seeing a sign that morning that I'd never seen before. It was like, if your kid ever gets hurt, they'll go to St. Anthony's Hospital.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'd never seen that before. Never noticed it. I kind of dropped her off. She didn't want to stay ever. Mm-hmm. So I mean, she was crying. I left, and I went on to work.
And she had toys at home that she needed to be playing with that day, you know?
I don't think she ever wanted me to leave her anywhere, but I left her and I went on to work, and then I remember exactly when the bombing happened.
So where did you work at?
I worked on 39th Expressway at an insurance company.
Okay.
So it was probably, 9, 10 blocks. I mean, it's not that far.
Yeah.
So.
And so what do you remember from that moment?
I remember, we felt the explosion. I mean, we weren't that far away, but we were pretty far away. And I remember thinking it was thunder, is what we kind of all thought it was. And then we could see like a plume of smoke downtown because my office window faced downtown.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, they must be doing demolition work. And I remember saying it out loud. And a girl goes, no, there's been an explosion in the federal courthouse, because it's what they thought it was at first. And I was like, well, my daughters are across the street from there in the federal office building. And so we had a break room that was upstairs. So I kind of walked up there and looked, and I could see the back side of the Murrah building. And I knew that was the building she was in. So another girl drove me down as far as she could. And I think we got about 3 or 4 blocks away. And then I walked the rest of the way.
And so she let you out, right? And you walked towards the building. What were you seeing in that moment that you were walking?
I remember there was tons of glass everywhere. Like everywhere.
Were you seeing people?
I could see people that were bleeding and they were hurt. But once I got up to that building, I looked at the front of it because I got close enough at that point, because it was still pretty early on. And I remember thinking, I can't believe anybody walked out of there alive. I mean, it was bad.
Yeah. It was, with everybody running. And then, there were several times that they thought there might be another, explosion, another bomb. And then people were having to evacuate. Were you immediately searching for your daughter? I mean, had that thought entered your mind?
That thought was in my mind. And I walked up to the corner of, let's see what that would be, 5th and Robinson. And there was a police officer standing there, and I was like, I'm looking for my daughter. She was in the daycare center in the federal building. And he said, well, there's not a daycare center in there. And I said, I just dropped her off. Yeah. I know there's a daycare center in there. And he kind of pointed to some other kids, and he goes, those are kids from the daycare center. But I looked at the children, and they weren't hurt like that, like they would have if they came out of that building. And I was like, those must be the kids from the YMCA daycare, because it was right close by there. And so I kind of remember walking around to the back side of the building, and I saw rescue workers working really hard. And of course I was asking, but they were like, they said, go around to the other side of the building, kind of where the Regency is. And they were like, there's a station, and you can put your child's name down, and we'll let you know if they've come out, whatever. And so by the time I got around there, I saw one of my sisters and my parents were there already looking for Baylee. And then they had the second bomb scare, and they kind of pushed everybody back. And so my sister and I were like, we'll just go to St. Anthony's Hospital because it's right there.
You saw the sign.
And so we got there, and Bailey's pediatrician was standing outside, and I told him, I said, she was in the daycare center. And so we walked inside, and he kind of checked, but they were like, they're taking all the children to Children's Hospital. So I was like, okay. So we walked probably like 5 miles to get my parents' car, because you couldn't get close by then at all. And I remember driving over to Children's, and we walked inside, and I didn't really know the people that also had children in the daycare center.
Okay.
I kind of went in there, dropped Baylee off, I didn't hang around. But I remember seeing a lot of their faces, and I remember thinking, they're all looking, and they were all kind of sitting around. And my mom knew a nurse that worked at Children's, and she said, Bailey's not here. She said, but there's a child that sounds just like her at St. Anthony's. And so we were like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah, it sounds just like her. So we got back in the car, drove back to St. Anthony's, and I walked inside, and I saw my pediatrician's nurse at this point, and she was like, they said there's a child that sounds just like Baylee here. And she goes, I think all the children are with parents that are here. And I was like, okay. And she goes, but let me check. And she got on the phone with the pediatrician, and she goes, oh God, no. And I was like, is she dead? And she was like, no, we don't know that. He's going to check. And then I was she was like, just wait here. And so he walked around the corner with the priest, and I knew that she was gone then.
Yeah.
But
when you were searching for and you were going to the hospitals, had that really set in or even crossed your mind?
I kind of thought, after seeing the building, of course, it was devastating, and I was surprised anyone lived. But I kept thinking, I'm going to find her, and she's going to be okay. Even if she's, like, hurt, she's going to be okay, because, like, this doesn't happen. I mean, you don't just lose a child like that. Yeah. So, no, I was hoping for the best, but...
And so about what time of day was that? And so that was Baylee then?
Yeah, she was in the morgue already by the time that I found her, which apparently, like, after Chris laid her down and they put her in the ambulance, they took her right out and put her in the morgue. So apparently she was probably already there the first time I went there. They just didn't know to look in the morgue at that point.
Okay.
Because I think she was, like, the only one in there.
Yeah. Was she one of the first ones then?
Yeah.
Because Chris Fields
put her there, because most of the children were being laid down behind the building where the children, they had a play area back there, and most of them were being laid back there.
Oh,
and
I see.
They laid all of the children back there, and then, but he didn't want to just leave her, so he gave her to the ambulance, and they took her.
And they took her to the hospital. So that was that evening then that you realized.
Yeah, it was probably like 2 in the afternoon. I mean, it wasn't late at all. But I mean, like, my mind, it could have been.
Yeah.
But I know it was still daylight. By the time I left the hospital, it was still daylight.
So when you left the hospital, I mean, did anybody at the hospital say something to you, or?
They took me into a room, and I don't know if it's because I was so young or just they didn't know what to do. But they took me into like a hospital room, and I remember they put like a chair in the middle of the floor. And then I remember there were psychiatrists and all kinds of people like sat around me, and they were like, you know, you need to call somebody. And I'm like, call who? I mean, like, at this point, I had never lost a grandparent. I mean, this was the first person to die in my family.
Oh, my goodness.
So we were like, oh, well, who do you want us to call? And also, I mean, I lived at the Regency Tower, and we couldn't go back home. So we ended up going to my grandparents' house and staying, because they were out of town, luckily. And we just ended up camping there. I mean, staying at their house until I think I wanted to have her funeral that Saturday. Like, I just wanted to get it over and done with. It ended up being the next Monday, because it took the coroner a lot longer to release the bodies than they had hoped for.
Yeah. So how far long was it before you saw the photo that was taken of Chris Fields holding Baylee?
Right. I saw the photo the next morning when I woke up.
You did? Where did you see it at?
I was at my grandparents' house. I had woke up that morning, and I was like, where's the paper? And everyone was like, oh, there's not a paper. I was like, yes, there is.
Why would there not? This was a big event. Why would there not?
I was like, there's a paper. And I finally found it, and I opened it, and I was like, that's Baylee. And my mom was like, no, we don't know that. So I got on the phone and called the pediatrician's office, and they put me through to him. I was like, have you seen the paper? He was like, no. And I was like, I think there's a picture of Baylee on the front of it. And he was like, there it is, her. He was like, I haven't seen it. He was like, but the other doctor that works in the office that knew who Baylee was, he said that it was her. So,
what was your thought when you saw that?
I didn't realize what it was. I mean, of course, I was 22. I just lost my only child. I remember waking up that morning, and I remember thinking, like, what am I going to do today? I mean, like, I'd been a parent for a whole year.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have anything to do.
And you can't even go back to your home.
Right. So, I mean, I was literally just there. And I was like, So, basically, I'm going to have to get up. And I'm going to have to walk into the living room. I mean, I literally had to walk myself through steps. If not, I could have just probably stayed in bed all day, which wasn't going to help me. It wasn't going to help anybody else.
Yeah. So what did you end up doing later on that day? I mean, after you saw that photo?
After I saw the photo, I remember, I mean, I for some reason, there was already a news crew there. They didn't know it was Baylee. And then I guess I said something. Some areas are kind of sketchy still. Yeah. But I remember like, this is all I have. This is all I have left. I mean, like, I was literally had the clothes on my back. I mean, I had no child. I had nothing from my house. Yeah. I mean, I literally had the clothes on my back that I went to work in that day.
Yeah. And just that disbelief and that moment of trying to process everything that had happened.
Mm-hmm. And then it just became a whirlwind.
What happened after that? Like, were people looking for interviews?
Right. When they first, like, I couldn't walk in front of the door because they would take pictures. I couldn't go out in public. If I went out in public, I felt like I couldn't smile because people are mostly nice, but some are mean. You know, they're like, oh, she's smiling. She doesn't even miss her. I mean, people, they just don't understand. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I just chose to, if I went out in public, I just didn't smile at all for a long time.
You felt like people judged everything you did?
Yep. Or people would walk up to me and they'd go, here's my child. Do you want to hold her? And I'm like, not really. You know, I mean, I know people mean well, but sometimes it's just better to just let people be. Mm-hmm. But
what was, in that moment, do you still remember the things that were said to you? That, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like people, you know, maybe trying to be nice or, you know, and things come out wrong. And
people would say, Baylee's in a better place now. God's taking good care of her. And in my 22-year-old mind, she was in a good place here, and I was taking good care of her. Yeah. And if I could have chose, I would have had her here. Yeah. So it was difficult, I think, because I was so young that I didn't. I mean, I know that people meant well, but I heard it so often that it just got to a point where I was like, if I hear that again, I'm probably going to hit someone. And my mom was like, oh, no. But, I mean, I think that people just didn't, I don't know if they just didn't, like you said, didn't realize I was young, how young I was, or they just didn't think of it as a loss. Because when people see the picture, even to this day, that's not a child to them. It's a symbol.
It is, yeah. I see exactly what you're saying. That's not your baby. Where you're like, that's my memories. That's my baby. That's my.
She was a real person, and she liked real things, and that always gets left behind. Even when they do stories about like all the children that died, they'll say like so and so like this or like that, but they always say Baylee. She was the baby in the fireman's arms.
Yeah. What did Baylee like?
She liked to go to baseball games with her cousins. She just liked to play, and she was a real person, and that gets left behind a lot.
Well, and I think sometimes when we see statues or we see those types of things, you almost think it's a kind of a depiction of somebody. Right. It's not actually made after someone. Right. So I can see how people would say, and because of the photo being shown so much, that, well, that's how they just depict the bombing.
Right. And they did. I mean, people would make statues and send them to the city. And I was like, what are you going to do with all these? The mayor was like, I think we're going to put them in parks. And I was like, do not put them in parks. I was like, because it's not fair to me. And he did realize that. And I don't know what they did with all of them. I mean, the guy from Precious Moments made a statue of it.
Oh, really?
And I called him and asked him not to sell them. And I was like, don't do that. And he was like, oh, I've lost a child in a car accident. And I was like, and did you make a statue out of that? Then he was like, no, I get your point. I mean,
well, and every time you see that is a reminder of that. I mean,
my child was dead. It wasn't like, that was the first picture ever published of somebody dead.
Really? Mm-hmm. And I think there's probably a misconception that you made money on the photo.
Yeah, I don't have any rights to it at all. I can beg.
But even though it's your daughter, you don't?
Because she was dead, and when you die, your rights are abolished. And Chris was a public figure as a firefighter, so he didn't have any rights either.
Wow.
So once it was copyrighted, then he makes money off of it. Charles Porter does, but I mean, I don't have any rights to it. I can call people and beg them not to use it, But if they've already paid the $10,000, $15,000 to use it each time, they're going to use it no matter what.
Do people treat you as though you made money off of that photo?
I think a lot of people think I do, but I don't. I have no rights to it. I mean, I can beg people, like I said, not to use it, but it doesn't always work.
And people tried to do, wanted to make T-shirts.
Yep.
And they wanted to make statues,
Yep.
and they wanted to sell it. And
there was a guy that did make statues at one time, and I remember it was like a 4th of July thing, and we were downtown, and I saw the statues, and I was like, "That's my daughter," and he goes, "For $85, you can have one of these statues." I was like, "No, thank you."
you're like, how about you don't sell that statue?
Right? But, yeah,
You know.
it didn't matter.
Wow, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Did what were that next week like? I mean, did you have a bunch of people from the government talking to you, or FEMA, or what are those moments like after an event of that size?
Right. I remember FEMA and stuff like that helping with, like, because we couldn't go home. Mm-hmm. So we had to have, like, we lived in a hotel for about 6 months, I think. And then I ended up buying a house and leaving. But it was a while. I mean, it was like 6 months that we lived in a hotel. And FEMA was great. The Red Cross was great. They were there, like, pretty fast. And it would, that kind of stuff, I mean, it seemed to go seamlessly, for me at least.
Yeah. How long was it before you went back into your apartment?
I did not go back. Well, I did. When they cleared it structurally, and we couldn't live there, but we could go back in, mm-hmm. It was well after I buried Baylee, because I had to go buy clothes to bury her in.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was maybe a couple of weeks after, and I remember the apartment building, they kind of closed the whole thing off and just let me go in by myself. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I mean, like, I went one time, and there was a lot of damage. I mean, I remember the windows were blown in, and I mean, like, everything was ajar, like you would think. I mean, nothing was reusable. Like, really? Like, I could get the pictures, mm-hmm. but I mean, I had to put them all in new frames, things like that. That nothing was still. You couldn't reuse anything.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because there was so much glass.
Just everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically had to get personal stuff that just couldn't be.
Right. I mean, everything that was in that building, everything that was in my apartment at least, was not reusable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now they did a big service mm-hmm. for kind of everybody that was involved.
Right.
And what was that like?
It was nice. I mean, like, a lot of stuff about that time, it's kind of fuzzy, but I remember going to that, and I remember meeting President and Hillary Clinton at it. But other than that, I mean, it was just, I'm like...
Was it like you were almost in a fog, like you're going through the motions,
right.
But...
That is a lot of it. It was, I mean, I had lost, like, the only thing, I used to tell Baylee, "You're the only thing I own outright."
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. So, I mean, that was tough.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think other people responded to you at those events?
Oh, well, it's not good. Like, people in general are really nice, mm-hmm. and still are to this day. But the other families is a little bit more difficult. Mm-hmm. But
is it because Baylee was so prominent, and everybody knew who Baylee was? Mm-hmm. Everybody. Yeah,
they kind of say that everybody knows who Baylee is, and she's never going to be forgotten. But their kids are. And they're like, Baylee's not the only one that died that day. I've never said she was. Mm-hmm. I've never wanted that attention. If I could go without it, then I would be good.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've always tried to be really kind every time. Mm-hmm. Every interview I've done, everything, and I'm like, I just want people to think, you know what, Baylee came from a good family, and she would have grown up to be a good person, and that's always been my goal.
And she would have.
And that's just, that's what I've always tried for. So,
Do you remember meeting Chris Fields, the firefighter that was carrying Baylee that day?
I do remember meeting him. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago because I was like, how long was it afterwards? And I think it was maybe like the next day, because he was like, I was at the station that day, wasn't the next. So it would have been the Thursday that I met him, because he said he was back at the station on Friday. So, I mean, like I said, days seemed to go, but I do remember meeting him. And I know he was so scared to meet me.
He was? Why do you think that was?
Because he didn't save her. But to me, that's not what it was. It was, thank you for caring, because I knew she was gone.
Well, and you can tell by the photo that he cared. And I think that's why people were so drawn to that.
Right.
Because you could tell.
Right.
He cared for her, you know.
Yeah. Because his son, Ryan was only 2 at the time. So, I mean, there wasn't that much of an age difference. So,
I always say that, you know, being a firefighter is you don't get to pick who you save.
Right.
And the people you want to save the most are usually the ones that die. You know, and that's hard.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was a struggle for him.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm actually going to be getting his story. He had quite a struggle with PTSD. And, you know, as I mean, you think about not only your first responders and family members, but the people that were just there to witness it, how all of these people have been changed forever.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was lucky to find out that day Baylee died, because I never had to go back. I mean, like, some of those people stood down there for days waiting to hear news. I never had to do that, and I was lucky, especially when the picture came out the next day. Some of the pictures would say that she was alive. Some of them say she's dead. So, I mean, luckily I already knew, and I feel grateful for that.
How long did it take you to go then back down? Did you go back down to that area?
I think I went one time that I remember, and I had to do like an interview one day, and it was early because it was like a morning show, so it's of course dark outside still. And I remember looking at the building, and they were still cleaning. They were still like looking for people, and it was just, the building was lit up with lights, but it was dark outside, and I remember how eerie it looked. But that was the only time I ever went back.
It is, yeah. Okay, so did you attend any of McVeigh's trial?
I went to one change of venue hearing, and it was in Oklahoma City, and I just remember when I walked out, like, I felt bombarded with media. So I just decided not to go to any others, and I didn't go to any hearings at all.
Was he there?
He was there.
What was your thought when you first saw him? Were you already in the courtroom when he walked in?
I think I was already in there. He was already in there when I walked in, and I remember him turning around, and he was looking into the crowd, and I remember thinking, oh, I mean, like, how dare him? You know, I mean, he's literally looking us all in the face like, I killed your family members. And so, I mean, I just decided to never go back again, and I didn't.
You didn't go to any of the rest, but you did attend the execution.
I did.
And that was, what, June 11th, 2001?
Yep. I went to the closed circuit.
Okay.
When they picked people to go to the execution itself, they picked 10 non-high-profile people, and they were like, you're not one. So I ended up going to the closed circuit.
Okay. And what was that like?
It was different. I mean, we kind of were all sitting there. They started the feed, and he was already laying on the gurney at that point. And they asked him if he had any last words. He kind of like he was going to say something, and then he kind of shook his head no. And it seemed like he had maybe had some tears in his eyes. And then they started the medication. I remember his eyes kind of rolled back and twitched a little bit, and then he was gone.
And that was it.
I mean, it was pretty simple.
What were your thoughts on that? I mean, to be witnessing it.
Right. It's definitely sombering. I mean, for one, I didn't want the execution for revenge. there's nothing that's going to make me feel better about my daughter dying, even him dying. That's not making me feel better. I never wanted to turn on my television set and see him explain why he did it. Because why he did it doesn't matter to me. I mean, it's not going to make me feel better. I'm not going to see his side of it. My loss isn't any less. And the kind of the way I look at it is, it doesn't benefit me. So therefore, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
But, you know, when he did die, my heart went out to his mother.
And why is that?
Because I'm a mother that's lost a child. She didn't raise, I mean, the time she had him to the time that he left for the army, I mean, she didn't raise a terrorist. That was her blonde-headed little boy running around the house, just like mine, just like yours. I mean, I felt sorry for her. I mean, my heart went out to her because she's lost a child. Doesn't matter what he did. And I remember people going, how dare her stand beside him? And I'm like, how dare her not?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing that one of my children could do. I might not agree with it, and I might give them more hell than anybody else would, but I wouldn't turn my back on one of my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that says a lot about, kind of about where you come from, where you're willing and you feel sorry for her too, because that is a loss. Yeah. It's a mother.
She's lost a child, and I've lost a child. I know how it feels. It's not good. Yeah.
Now, you and Chris actually a little while later had worked on a project for glass.
Right.
That was right.
I started a nonprofit called Protecting People First Foundation, and I fought for safer federal buildings, daycare centers, federal buildings, daycare centers in federal buildings, to have a kind of like the windshield of your car. When you get in a car wreck, it spiders, but it doesn't actually break in. And that's what is on federal buildings now.
And they said after the explosion, there were something like 600 people that were injured. And they said a majority of the people who were injured and who died was from glass.
Yeah. Like over in foreign countries, when they'll do like a small explosion in the street, and when people walk over to the window to see what it was, they do the big explosion, and that's when the glass hits. So it's definitely, I mean, I was like, you're not even letting people go into federal buildings, you're making them come in for Social Security cards, for VA benefits, for different things, and you're not protecting them.
Yeah.
So I did get 3 laws passed in Congress, and they were to make safer federal buildings, and then also safer daycare centers. So like when I enrolled Baylee in that daycare center, they didn't say the FBI's on the 3rd floor. I mean, that's just not something they had to tell. Now they do. And now they have to. Apparently they'd had a lot of bomb threats there. And they're like, we just didn't tell the families of the kids in the daycare because we didn't want the enrollment to drop. And I'm like, I probably would have left Baylee there because I felt like she was safe, but it still should have been my decision to make.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So now they have to notify you. So, and what people don't realize is, I mean, at the time that I did that, which was in 2000, there were 159 daycare centers in federal buildings across the United States. So, I mean, people don't even realize that there are federal buildings, daycare centers in most federal buildings.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, all over. So how did you personally get through that time? Or when you talk to people who have lost a child, what's your story like on that? How did you manage to get through?
I think staying busy helps. It helps a lot. I mean, I had the foundation, and one thing I remember is after 9/11, when the plane hit the Pentagon, the area that it hit was the only area they had started the renovations on. Oh, really? So when I went back and they redid Project Phoenix, is what they were calling it, they were like, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't be here. They were like, those windows, they were like, we used to laugh at them and call them the $10,000 windows.
Oh, really?
But the windows were so heavy, they had to put reinforcements in the walls, and those held up the building for 35 extra minutes.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, things like that, it makes me feel good that I was able to do something to make a difference in other people's lives, because I mean, if I had to go through something so horrific, I at least want to be able to make a difference for other people.
And I think you did, especially with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I try. I mean, I think the way I got through it was I did a lot of leaning on people. I mean, like I could call Chris in the middle of the night and he would come. I just did. I mean, I have a big family and we're very supportive of each other, so that makes a big difference too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm lucky that I do have a family that's close and they were all there every step of the way. So,
do you think that makes the difference?
Yeah, I do. And I think a lot of it was I was young. And I think that made a difference too because, I never intended on Baylee being an only child. So I knew that more children, and it's not like the other children were going to replace her, because if you were to sit in my home and we were all in there, even with my sister's kids and everybody, you probably wouldn't necessarily realize Baylee's gone, because we talk about her and she's part of our family. And if you ask my two kids, you're like, how many siblings do you have? They're like, I have a sister and a brother. I have two sisters. I mean, she's part of our family, and we don't.
Yeah.
It's no different than if she were there, probably.
And you've went on and you've had 2 other kids.
I do.
You want to brag on them?
I do. Bella is a senior at OU, and she is doing public relations, and she's joining the FBI. And then Brooks plays video games professionally, really? So I don't know how that is. I'm like, dang it. So I got one that's real enthused and one that's not spending.
He's like, thanks, Mom.
Don't we all have? I'm like, how can they do so different?
They are different.
Bella stole all of Brooks' ambition, I think.
What do you envision that Baylee would be like, and what would she be doing? Do you think about that?
I don't really.
No?
I don't, because I never got that chance. I mean, like milestones are hard. Like when she would have turned 16 was hard. When she would have turned 21 was hard. But I don't think about her as... I mean, yes, every year at her birthday we do go out and do stuff, but I don't think of her as like, what would she be when she was 26? Because I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have any idea. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I know that this is a hard time. I'm sure it's a hard time of year, and especially with the 25th anniversary, coming up this month.
Right.
Are you doing anything different? I know you're doing a lot of interviews,
right.
a lot of talking.
I have a lot of those to do. But like on Baylee's birthday, my family will do something, and then on the anniversary, my whole family goes. In fact, my nephew is getting married, and he was going to get married April 18th because that was, even though it was Baylee's birthday, his mom and dad got married on April 18th, and my sister said, "Is it okay if Joel gets married April 18th?" I was like, "I don't care," and he goes, "I can't." And he was like, we would never be able to go out of town for our anniversary because we have to be there on the 19th. And my whole family goes. So
on the remembrance ceremony, everybody is there.
Somebody has to be there to represent Baylee, and we all go. Even our little kids go. I mean, like my niece Marley, she's 7. She's like, look at all these people here. And we're like, yeah. But she's like, they're all here for my friend cousin Baylee. I'm like, well, they are. I mean, it's important to all of them.
And you also you volunteer with the Memorial Marathon.
We do. We hand out medals at the end usually. I was thinking about doing the 5K this year though. So
I think you can.
I think I can.
I think you're pretty fierce. I think you can definitely do that.
It might be the last one to come in, but hey, I'll do it.
That's right. Hey, you cross the finish line. You cross the finish line.
That's right.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say or you want to add that?
I appreciate people just in general. I mean, some people kind of stand back, and some people just flat out come up, and that's fine too. Because I mean, I understand. Maybe the 22-year-old me didn't understand, but now I do. I mean, I understand, and I know that people, they just mean well. But I mean, I think just the support that I've always gotten from people is amazing. I mean, people are so kind, and they just want to let you know that they care, and that's something that I did definitely have to get used to. But I mean, even now, I mean, there are so many girls named after Baylee. And that's amazing to me. I mean, some of them are having children of their own now because, I mean, she would be 26. So A lot of them are like right around 25. I got them all the way down to 4 years old. So I mean, there's a lot of different ages, and it's amazing that people. I feel so honored that people thought enough of her to name their children that, to carry on her name. So that's nice to me.
Well, and I will say that I remember I was having surgery one time, and you told me, you go, Baylee's going to watch over you. Like, she's going to be there. And I just, like, that is one of the things that I remember people, like somebody saying to me, you said to me right before just having that surgery.
And I don't, and this might sound awful, I don't usually ask Baylee to, unless it's really important to me. Just because I don't want to feel like, I feel like I'm using up all my friends. So it's like, okay, so if it's like really important to me, I'm like, Baylee, you have to watch over, but.
Well, then I'm honored that you used up one of those for me.
I used one of my wishes up for you. But I don't, because I just feel like, and then Bella, my 22-year-old that goes to OU, she talks to Baylee a lot. A lot. I mean, she's always like, okay, Baylee, this is the last time, but she knows it's not. Like, exactly.
Well, I'm sure she loves to be a part of the family.
Exactly. It's like, oh no, but we always say she's probably the busiest guardian angel in heaven, but
she probably is. Well, and you have a lot of sisters,
she always
a lot
comes
of nieces
through
and
for
nephews.
us. That's right. She always comes through for us. So we're lucky.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to wrap it up with this is, Aren, what's it really like to lose a child in the Oklahoma City bombing?
I think if I'm going to pick one word, it'd be devastating.
Devastating.
Because it's a loss that you were never expecting on having.
And a loss that you didn't deserve.
Right. No. And I think when it comes to that picture, I can look at it like that's a symbol, and it's everybody was somebody's child at some point. And that was the innocence lost. I mean, whether you were 50 or whether you were 6 months old, I mean, the innocence that was lost that day was horrific because no one there deserved it.